Hey, good morning, and welcome to the Comics Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club. It's a brand new year. We're starting a brand new year. It's January of 2025, and we're starting off with the Kids Club. I love the Kids Club. It's my favorite show because kids are the future. And we've got a really good book for you today from a cartoonist who I have a lot of love for. He's been doing comics for almost as long as I've owned my store, 30 plus years. And yeah, I'm really happy to have Mendel the Mess Up with TERRY LaBAN. Hello, Terry.
Hey, Brian.
How are you, man?
I'm good.
Yeah, excellent. I'm glad to hear that. I always start the show with the same question. And I really like this question. And it's, why comics? Of all the things that one could do, what is it about comics that speaks to you, that touches you, that makes you want to make that your creative endeavor? Particularly because comics are a fairly solitary existence, and it's a lot of work for not necessarily a lot of money. So yeah, what is it about comics that made you build your whole career around them?
Well, first of all, that's a question that I've been asking myself the whole time. So why couldn't I have been obsessed with stocks? Why wasn't it finance or investing? That is a really good question. I wanted to be a cartoonist starting at a very early age, and all I can tell you is that there was something about, this is my little origin story, is that there was something about Peanuts, and I would read the comics in the newspaper. Those were, a big deal back at that time. And there was something about the way Charles Schulz drew, and specifically the way Charles Schulz drew grass. He had this juicy, entrancing line that just sucked me in. And I wanted to live in that world, and I wanted to be able to create a world like that. And it just completely obsessed me. And that obsession never really left. It wasn't always comics as in long form comic books. When I was a kid, I really wanted to do comic strips because that was the big thing to do. And I really didn't know that much about comic books. And even later on, when I read comic books as a kid, strips were kind of, at that time, the highest thing a cartoonist could aspire to. I didn't really get interested in doing long form comics until I was in high school. And really in college, when I saw the underground stuff, and that really grabbed me, and I really wanted to do that. There's something about a combination of words and images. I mean, they're kind of my two strengths in this life. I can draw and I can write, and there's something about that combination and that thing that they create together that's just so compelling to me. I could never shake it. Comics is a really unique art form in that it gives the creator everything. You have the tools to create an entire world completely on your own. And that solitariness really appealed to me because I'm an introvert, and I don't mind collaborating with people. And I've collaborated with people a lot. I mean, I do it for work. I like collaborating, but there's a personal vision also that I didn't want anybody else to kind of come in on. And that opportunity to just create a whole world was incredibly attractive to me, and it still is.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You came up doing alternative comics, and you came around the same time that Bag and Klaus and the Hernandez brothers. I mean, there's sort of that, I would almost call it a golden age of Fantagraphics. Mm-hmm. What was it like then doing those kinds of comics then?
Yeah, and I've thought about this a lot since, because at the time it was like discovering the people that your people. It was like discovering my people, because when I started doing this stuff, I was living in Ann Arbor, actually, and I was really not aware. Like, I really was interested in underground comics, and I'd gone on this long trip for a year and a half. I went around the world. When I came back, I was really interested. I was still interested in doing comics. And a housemate of mine who was into sort of contemporary, what was becoming the alternative scene, this was like 1989, told me, oh, well, there's all this stuff going on. There's all these people doing these interesting new comics. And, you know, there was the cool comic store in Ann Arbor, Dave's Comics. And I started finding Klaus's stuff in there, Bag stuff, the Hernandez brothers, certainly. I also had a personal connection to Klaus. A very good friend of mine in college had gone to school with him. We're the same age. Had gone to school with him in Chicago high school. And he would tell me in college, oh, yeah, my friend's a cartoonist, this guy, Dan Klaus. I didn't really know who he was. So I became aware that this stuff was happening. And I was like, oh, my gosh, people are making like new underground comics.
Yeah.
We want to be involved in this. And I put out, there was like a big mini scene at the time. I put out minis. They attracted the attention of Fantagraphics, and I found myself, you know, with a book deal. I still really wasn't aware, and I don't think I was aware ever during the time it was actually happening, what a real scene it was and what a real movement it was and what cohesive it actually was. I mean, it was like being in Paris in the 20s in a kind of a way. And for me, so I was living in Chicago. I'd moved to Chicago right after Fantagraphics started publishing my first book, Unsupervised Existence. And when I moved there, Dan Klaus actually wrote me a postcard. He was in Chicago and said, hey, I hear you're moving to Chicago. You're a Fantagraphic artist. We should get together. Yeah. I'd seen Lloyd Llewellyn. He was just working on the first 8-Ball at the time. So I was like, cool, you know, and I knew we had this mutual friend. I went over to his house. You know, we started hanging out. And we ended up having this group. I don't know if you know about this. You probably do. But we ended up having this group that met, I think it was every other week. I don't remember how often it was, a couple times a month, at a coffee shop in Wicker Park in Chicago. It was me, Dan. The core people were me, Dan, this guy, Gary Lieb, who did some stuff for Fantagraphics.
Yep.
He was in a band with Doug Allen, who did Steven, and they ended up having like exactly the same drawing style, which was kind of weird. Yeah. But us three, and then later on, Chris Ware was a regular. And then there was a sort of a drifting assortment of other people. Jessica Abel would come sometimes, but we would meet. Archer Pruitt was a regular, who was in Sea and Cake and did Soft Boy was his comic that he did. So we would meet like twice a month at this coffee shop in Wicker Park in the evening, and we would do these jam minis. We would try to crack each other up, and like usually we would fold them so they would be like 8 pages, like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and somebody would name them, you know, like Fuzzy or something like that, and draw a cover, and then we'd pass it around and just try to crack each other up. And later on, I mean, I kind of realized at the time, but later on I realized like, wow, I was in like, that was like an incredible thing. I was in like this, that was like something you read about.
Yeah.
You know, like I hung out with like Jerry Garcia at the, you know, some studio for, you know, I hung out with like Picasso. We were all like drinking coffee. And I mean, I learned a ton doing that. And I just felt like, but at the time, the feeling was like, there was no internet. There was no larger comics culture. Most like the people that were into undergrounds and wanted to actually create, and we were all inspired by undergrounds. We thought of ourselves as underground cartoonists. We were doing new stuff, but we thought of ourselves as kind of directly coming off that tradition. The people who were into that stuff and wanted to do that stuff were very rare. I mean, it's like, it was like a weird thing to be into.
Yeah.
So it was like finding my people, and then going to San Diego, and you know, and there was quite a cartooning scene in Chicago too. That just became a really nice social thing. I mean, it was just really nice to hang out with other people that were into what I was into and that were so talented. I mean, these people were like, I mean, like mind-blowingly talented. And it was only later when I was not in that scene anymore and everything had changed and the world changed and people weren't even doing that kind of work, at least in that kind of format.
Right. That
I looked back and said, oh my gosh, like I was part of a genuine artistic movement that was like, important.
Did that spur you to I don't know, draw harder, draw faster, to produce more work, or were you like, oh, these people around me are all so amazing? Do you know what I mean? Like where were you in that space? Does that make sense as a question? Without, I wasn't trying to be insulting there.
No, you're not. And it was intense. I felt this mixture of love because I really these people were personal friends. I mean, we had adventures together, we did stuff. Admiration, awe, but also, I mean, I felt intense envy. I mean, I was envious of the stuff they could do. I was envious of, in some cases of the success that they were having, of the attention that they were getting. And I had a lot of conflicting feelings about it. And a lot of levels, it was tough. And on a certain level, it was tough. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a but there. But did it? Yeah, I mean, sure. Sure, it pushed me.
Yeah.
Because I wanted a piece of the pie. I wanted a chunk of the apple,
Sure.
I wanted an article in, Comics Journal.
Right. Yeah. Well, and alternative comics were always hard. I mean, that's, it was always a tough business, that segment of it. So
if you could call it a business.
Yeah. Did you have formal art training?
Yes, I graduated from the University of Michigan School of Art and Design. Now it's called something else. I forget what, but it's the art school at the University of Michigan. With my degree, so it was a BFA. My major was graphic design. When I transferred into the art school I started out in just the lit school, and I decided I was going to be pre-law because I thought that's what a sensible person would do.
Sure.
And about a year in, I realized I was not going to be a lawyer, and I have to try and be a cartoonist because that's all I want to do in this world. Yeah. So I went to the school and I wanted to transfer in, and I said, "Hey, I want to be a cartoonist." And they said, "We don't teach cartooning here." But they said, the closest thing you could study is graphic design. And I didn't know what graphic design was, but I said, okay. It ended up being the best thing I could have done, actually, because I don't really have a native graphic sense. I don't really understand that stuff intuitively. So that training's really been invaluable. So
yeah,
I'm happy. The answer is yes. I never was trained in comics.
Right. Yeah. And so, and I guess then my question becomes, how did you, because today, right, every new cartoonist goes to a school that teaches cartooning, right? Essentially. Yes, so how did you start getting those tools of the page, right? Of how you pick the right picture to juxtapose with the next right picture. Do you know what I mean? Like that, the timing and that part of cartooning is kind of a magic thing,
Yeah. Gosh, and I have to tell you, I just basically thought I could do it, so I tried.
Yeah.
I started out, the first stuff I did was I was very involved with my college humor magazine, The Gargoyle, and I would try to do sort of undergroundy comics for them, which, I did do that.
Yeah.
They were awful. I didn't really know how to draw comics, and I don't, there's a lot of cartoonists, even a lot of alternative cartoonists, go through this period where they really educate themselves on the art. They spend a lot of time looking at their favorite comics and trying to imitate that. They read books on the topic.
Yeah.
I did some of that, but mostly I just sort of plunged on in. And to tell you the truth, there were things that took me years to figure out that I could have, if somebody had taken me under their wing, or I'd had some kind of class, they could have just told me. I did a lot of reinventing the wheel, and I don't, sometimes I'm very kind of, I'm just, it's not that I don't need any outside education. It's just, I'd rather, I don't do it. Somehow the stuff I was doing was good enough to get published and paid for in a lot of cases, because I was able to support myself as a cartoonist quite early on. I was very fortunate. I started out drawing political cartoons for the Ann Arbor News, and that was my first gig. And I was pretty much able to support myself on that and illustrations and drawing caricatures at parties at like 25. And so that's, but there were a lot of things that it took me years to learn that it would have benefited. I would have benefited by knowing a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Do you want to give an example of what one of those kinds of things might have been?
Well, I'll give you a couple. One of them was just basic drawing stuff, like figure ground stuff. I had a lot of trouble with spotting blacks and, solid blacks and making things read properly in comics. I didn't really understand how to do that. There are some really simple guidelines that I kind of discovered on my own, but I later understood that like a lot of people know them. I wish I'd known that earlier. It would have saved me a lot of time and energy and led to better comics. I'll tell you a really simple one. All through my Fantagraphics career, I would draw word balloons, and if two word balloons, two characters are talking, they have adjoining word balloons, I would often leave the borders out so the word balloons would join. And I just did that because I thought it looked good or something. When I started doing the series I did for Dark Horse, Cud Comics, I actually had an editor that worked with me. It was Diane Schutz, and then I think it was Anna Bennett first, and then it was Diane. Anyways, the one I was working with early on said, when you have adjoining balloons and you leave you attach them, that means the characters continuing their speech. So you want to divide those balloons. I was like, oh. I've done like 16 comics, like nobody told me that. Like, okay.
Yeah, Fanta was not exactly a hands-on editorial company,
God.
I don't think.
No, they were not. And God bless them. I mean, guidance was not their thing. Guidance is something that has been, for some reason, hard for me to find. People have generally, a lot of times, not corrected me very much on my stuff, for better or for worse. I guess they liked it, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, your cartooning's always been strong, right? And so, that covers a multitude of sins in a way. But heck, working with Diana, she's one of the best editors in the business, I think. Anna as well. And then after that, you ended up working at Vertigo. So with Karen Berger, I'm assuming,
I didn't really work directly with Karen so much. I talked to her sometimes. I would visit the office a couple times a year. When I would visit my in-laws in New Jersey, I'd go into New York. So I would talk to her then. I mostly worked with my editors there. I would work with Elisa Quitney, was the editor on my best known stuff that I did. And then a guy named Lou Stathis, who was, do you know who he is?
I know Lou,
sweetheart. He got brain cancer
while
we were working on a comic series.
Wow.
And I would be with him on the phone, and he would like be saying this wacky stuff, and I didn't know why, and then it was really a tragedy. And I worked with I worked with a couple other people there as well, but those were the main people.
Yeah. Was it a big jump for you to go from cartooning to writing scripts for a mainstream publisher? You were doing outro work, but working for DC is a little different than working for Fantagraphics or Dark Horse, certainly.
Well, yeah. So the story is, I was doing these alternative comics, but I wasn't, they don't pay anything. Fantagraphics give me like $500 for every comic I did. In the mid '90s, the big impetus was that I had a kid, and then I had another kid. So I really kind of had to step up my game. I was hanging out with a lot of cartoonists in Chicago by then, who were mainstream cartoonists. People like Alex Ross was there, but there's a lot of other people who were just working in mainstream comics, and they were all making a living doing their stuff. And then I realized like, hey, like my style, my drawing style is not going to fly in a mainstream comics universe, but I can write. This stuff doesn't seem super hard. Maybe I can write this stuff. So I think it must have been 1994 and 1995. I used to go to San Diego every year. I would get like all my work for the coming year when I went. So I started going around San Diego saying, and a lot of people told me they really liked my writing and in the comics I was doing. So I went around San Diego and I talked to all the editors I knew and I said, hey, I want to start writing comics, got an assignment for me. And I actually think Diana Schutz gave me my first one. And I think it was my first big thing was a Grendel series.
Yeah.
I did some small things for Dark Horse. I think my first thing was a Predator story of all things.
Oh.
But the thing is, like, I'm a pretty good hack. And when I say that, I don't mean to denigrate. I know that's a word that's often used in denigration, but to me, like, I'm a professional creative. You want a story about Predator? Hey, cool. Like, what's your page rate? And I'll sit down and generate that for you. And I took that as a real challenge. And I wanted to do stuff that they wanted to buy. Through that, I ended up getting this, and I still don't know how it happened. Elisa Whitney ended up choosing me out of several other people to do the first story arc for The Dreaming, which was their follow-up to Sandman, let's not even go there, which was ending that year. Yeah. And she picked me. I'm not sure why, but she did.
Did you submit for that? Did you
pitch
for that? Okay.
Yeah, I did a pitch.
Yeah. Okay.
So she bought the pitch, but commercially, I mean, I wasn't like a big name to launch the series. Yeah. Anyways, she did, thank God. And that was like a big job. And I was totally unfamiliar with Sandman. And this is how I went into most of these things. I didn't know anything about Predator. I don't, mainstream comics, generally speaking, they don't really appeal to me. I mean, I don't read them very much. I knew about Sandman, of course, but I didn't really know it. So they sent me like a whole bunch of Sandman books and, I plowed through them and, put on my little thinking hat and came up with a pitch and they bought it. And I think I did a couple story arcs for that, but that kind of got me into DC Vertigo.
Right.
And then my ambition became to get a monthly series, because that was the only way I was going to stay doing comics.
Sure.
That was the only way I was going to make a regular income.
Yeah.
I was just like, I gotta find a way to make money, or I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started pitching them series to the various editors there that I knew. And I knew a lot of them from going to the comic conventions. And I sold a bunch. I mean, I sold like 3 creator-owned series to them, but none of them went to monthly. And I just couldn't do it in the end. I spent a couple of years trying, and I just couldn't do it. Yeah. I don't have that kind of sensibility in the end. The one gig that did stick from those days was working for Disney Egmont, writing Donald Duck stories. And that's probably the biggest reason I ended up doing middle grade stuff. I wrote Donald Duck stories for 14 years. And I used to do like 100 pages a year for them. And I really liked it. Like it was a really good gig. Like I really understood Donald Duck. Those kind of comics were the kind of comics that I liked. And sometimes they would fly us to Europe, and they paid well. And I learned a lot about storytelling doing that stuff, because the stories are so basic and well structured and character based. The rhythm is just really recognizable. They're very comforting stories, and if you have a handle on that kind of story, you can like basically write any kind of story. So that ended up being my longest lasting comics writing gig.
Yeah. Was there at any point that you thought about, or they asked you maybe to draw any of the Duck stuff? No.
Oh, no. Yeah, those guys. I don't know if you've seen those comics, but
oh, sure, yeah.
They're like gorgeous. I mean, those guys.
Yeah.
But they're all trains. I mean, whether I had the capacity to do that kind of thing, I mean, who knows? There was a style variation
Sure.
with
Sure.
those artists, but I mean, European art is like a whole different beast. There's a finesse to it and a refinement to it that I actually don't think you find here very much at all. I mean, maybe Charles Burns sometimes approaches that, but
Yeah.
yeah, so no. And that was fine. I was happy being a writer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think of, more cartoony, say a Don Rosa or Carl Barks for a good example, is not as fine line, as that European stuff. And it's all quite well respected in Europe is my understanding.
It is. I mean, I think Don Rosa is sort of a bit of an outlier in that sense. But he has a very unique position, or did. I'm not sure he's still alive, but
he's still alive. Yeah.
Oh, is he? Okay. Most of the people they used had this just beautiful, fluid, drawing style that I was just really that's out of my league.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned your love of Peanuts, and I mean, I do think that your art is Schultzian in terms of that kind of cartooning. And it would have been interesting to see you draw some ducks. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a better hack writing than I am drawing.
Yeah.
When I draw, it always looks like me, and they like it to look Disney.
Yeah.
But I actually, to be honest, I'm sort of just talking. I never discussed it with them, and they never asked me. So
right.
I don't really know what they said.
Yeah. After that, you worked on a strip, correct?
Yes, I did.
Yeah. So you finally, 20 years later or whatever it was, got to do the thing that you thought you were going to do at 6.
That I wanted, that I fantasized about doing. Yeah. So in 2000, it was actually 2000, the strip started. In 2000, I got syndicated. It was actually me and my wife co-created the strip Edge City with King Features. And that really saved my cartooning career. I was kind of in a bad place when that happened. All the comic stuff I've been doing, it kind of reached a natural end. It was very clear to me I was not going to be a DC writer. I'd kind of reached the end of the line. There was a big shakeup in the comics industry around that time.
Sure.
A lot of people got laid off, including a lot of the editors I was working with at DC. Mm-hmm. And it just, it hadn't been viable for a while, but it was really clear that it wasn't viable. I had a development deal with Nickelodeon around that time to do a series, and that ended up not happening. And I was just, I did not know what I was going to do. I was really not in great shape. And Jay Kennedy, who I knew and was the editor at King Features at that time, may he rest in peace. I'd had some dealings with him over the past. I'd actually tried doing some strips in the past and submitting them. Hadn't gone anywhere. But he called me up more or less out of the blue and asked me if I wanted to do the art on a strip that they were going to syndicate. And I said, sure. But then the artist ended up, the writer didn't like my stuff, whatever. But I said to Jay, hey, now that I got you on the phone, would you be willing to look at a strip? Oh, sure. Anytime,
Mm-hmm.
So we pitched him this strip that was basically about modern family life, long story short. And he said, we'll syndicate it. I guess they were looking for stuff at the time. And so that was a happy day. And they skipped the development period, which, if people know about strips, generally what happens is when a syndicate agrees to syndicate your strip, you do a 9-month development period where you do the strip every single day and they pay you $4,000 for the entire time. Yeah. And then at the end, they decide if they're going to syndicate your strip. And actually, famously, Bill Watterson did this and got rejected by, I think it was either United and then he went to Universal or vice versa. I'm not sure which one it was. So I don't know how long that executive lasted, but they skipped that with us. They just went right to syndication, which we thought was great at the time. And business-wise, it was. They still paid us the $4,000, but development. I mean, I kind of wish it had a little bit more development. It kind of went out really fast. Our submission was the first month that actually ran.
Wow.
This is like the story of my life, right? People just
Uh-huh.
put out my stuff. But it was a 15-year contract.
A 15-year contract. Wow. Is
Yeah.
that a traditional length? I actually know the least about strips of all the parts of comics.
Yeah,
Strips are the part I don't know the least about.
it is.
Mhm.
It is traditional. I mean, they can drop you if your circulation falls below a certain point.
Yeah.
What it really is a 10-year contract with an option to renew for 5 years, and then obviously they can renew after that if the strip's successful. But yeah, it was basically a 15-year contract, which I mean seemed like forever. And off I went, and the strip was never huge, but it provided us with it provided me really with a steady income. Wasn't my whole, I couldn't make an entire living off of it, but I could, it was like half.
Yeah.
So that was really great. And it lasted like basically as long as my kids were little, they grew up, and then,
And
that
this was a Monday through Friday plus a weekend?
yeah. And I was fortunate enough to live in towns where it ran. So it started when we started, we lived in Chicago. They ran it there in the Sun-Times. And then it ran in Philadelphia in the Inquirer for our entire time, which was a really gratifying thing. And doing that strip, it was really an interesting experience because, it kind of, during the time we were doing it, comic readership just went, newspaper readership just went into the toilet. And in the wild, I would rarely meet people that read the strip, but I described to somebody sometimes it was like being on methadone, like I get to be a cartoonist every day, but like I kind of feel like nobody reads my stuff. In point of fact, we had millions of readers, but I didn't get a lot of response. But the great thing about the strip was that I really feel like that's what made me a cartoonist in a funny kind of way. Because I finally was able to get my drawing style to where I wanted it. Whereas with, to shake off this underground crosshatchy line that I'd adopted that really wasn't native to me, that wasn't, like you said, you're referencing Charles Schultz. I mean, Chris Ware, name drop, but Chris Ware once told me, you're one of the only cartoonists I know that actually has a line,
Sure.
Like, you have a line, like most people don't. And I was like, huh. But with the strip, I was finally able to let go of the things that were holding the line back, the crosshatch, all this little stuff that I took from Crumb and then took years trying to get back out of my system. And so at the end, I felt like I really had a drawing style that was mine, like I really knew how to draw stuff finally.
Yeah. When you do a strip, I assume that you're kind of thinking in your head in chunks, right? Like a week at a time or a storyline at a time, perhaps. I'm not quite sure, like the methodology there. Go ahead.
Yeah, the way it worked for us with our strip was we had like 2-week stories that would run for 2 weeks. So my wife and I would meet every week, usually on a Sunday, and we'd sort of hash out the week. She would often come up with the big ideas. She's sort of out in the world for stories and things like that. A lot of them kind of came from either issues in our lives or just stuff we read about, family stuff. And so she would often come up with like topics, and we sort of rough out a storyline. Then I would break it down into actual strips with punchlines and drop roughs to show her. And I would do that every week. So I would do a week every week, unless we were going on vacation. If you're going on vacation, you have to do 2 weeks in one week. So that was always a bit of a trauma. And so that's what we did. And so then I had like a little regular schedule. So, Monday I'd like pencil all the dailies, and Tuesday I'd like ink all the dailies, and, Wednesday I'd scan everything. And then Thursday and Friday I'd do the Sunday, or it was something like that. I had like a chunk to do every single day. And then, you email them to the syndicate. I mean, thank God, I was doing my strip at a time when you could just email your stuff, because that didn't used to be the case. And then I could color it all myself, which was great, because, only a few years before you would have to do this whole, you'd have to indicate all the colors for them and everything. And they would charge you for the production.
Wow.
Yeah. So the fact
Okay.
that I could do it myself was like, that was like a huge thing.
Yeah.
So,
what about the sort of the mechanical differences between writing a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and doing a strip, whereas even if you're telling a story day after day, you can't assume that someone read yesterday's. Right? So you've always got to put a certain amount of recap in everything. And you also always have to end with a joke.
Exactly.
And so that seems to me like 2 of your 4 panels are already spoken for. So you've really only got 2 panels a day to move things forward. That seems like a real crazy challenge to me.
Yeah, a lot of them were actually 3 panels. So
yeah.
I mean, you learn how to do it. It's like, and a lot of times the recap is just, do you think your dad ever, got that package he sent away for? Like, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Transition, or, what I'm looking for the word for, expand on the topic, then punchline. So the idea was always like, I'm assuming that nobody's following the story, or only a couple of people are. So every time I want to make sure that everybody knows what's going on. But I think we were pretty good at it. Once you get a hold of the rhythm, it's not, it's understandable.
Yeah. Was it a big adjustment from when you were writing stories from other people to draw, which are, at Vertigo, it was 22-page long stories. I'm not quite sure what the Egmonts were, but probably 10 or 15 at a time. Yeah.
And sometimes a lot of them were 8, 8 pages are pretty common. Yeah, I mean, it's a completely different thing.
Yeah, right. Well,
but that was the thing that I wanted to do. I mean, I understood it. Like, I understood the rhythm, of how it goes. And then also with strips, the characters don't change, right? You're always going back to stasis. Whereas, I mean,
unless you're High and Lois or something like that, where they age.
Well, do they? No, High and Lois don't age. For better and for worse age.
Oh, for better and for worse. Sorry. Yeah.
And of course, Gasoline Alley. But and that was true of a lot of, I mean, of course, that's true of Donald Duck also. I mean, Donald Duck doesn't change. I mean, it's always, that was a real similarity, actually, that I had been working with a lot of characters in a static world where it's really just about different personalities kind of bumping up against each other and the hijinks that ensue. And that's the kind of thing I kind of like, actually. Having characters change is really a difficult thing, That's like the hardest part of writing, I think, is having your characters change in a convincing way.
Right.
And that's something I didn't actually do for very much for a long time, because everything I did was comics. And
all right. Well, so then let's switch over to Mendel, because once you do a graphic novel, the characters have to change, right? Like a graphic novel is all about change.
Yes.
Right. People have to start in one place and end up in a different place. That's just the nature of that kind of a story.
Yeah.
Was that a challenge for you to have to sort of readjust your thinking?
Yes. But I don't know if it's so much about readjustment as about doing something that I hadn't been able to do before. And I mean, this was not my first stab at a graphic novel. I think I have like 4 in my desk. So I've actually been trying to do this for some time. But I hadn't been able to put it over until Mendel. And I describe it to people as, it's like an engine running, or it's like picking a lock. When you get the solution that works, and it's a puzzle, right? All stories are puzzles. They're all problems that need to be solved. The characters have problems, but then you have a problem, which is like solving the character's problem in a way that is convincing, that comes from the character,
Yeah.
right? It's not just an arbitrary thing you're imposing. I mean, the problem has to arise from what the character wants, right? The character's motivations has to create the problem, but then it also has to be the solution to the problem, right? So when you solve that problem, it's like you pick a lock and you hear the little tumblers just tumble into place, and you can open the door. And it's an immensely satisfying feeling. And when I found the solutions for Mendel, when I was writing Mendel, it was like, oh, like sometimes there were points in the story where it was like a revelation, like, oh, this is what it is. But that took a lot of thinking and a lot of false starts.
Yeah, I bet. You also, Mendel is structured in chapters. There's 6 chapters, I want to say.
Yeah.
So they're sort of roughly, each one is a comic book length story.
I guess, yeah.
They're all like kind of 18 to 22 pages, somewhere in there, I'm just wondering, like, was that conscious, or is that just what happened as you started writing the story?
Yeah, I didn't plan them to be that long.
Yeah.
Necessarily, it wasn't like, oh, each of the chapters has to be 20 pages. It is kind of how it shipped down, but there's also the sense that I didn't want a chapter to be 10 pages, right? Yeah. And then I didn't want a chapter to be 50 pages. Like, I wanted to punctuate the story, and like 20, 30 pages, that's a reasonable amount of storytelling and then a reasonable break. So yeah.
How did Mendel come about?
How did Mendel come about? That's a good question. I mean, the short answer is the idea popped into my head one day when I guess I was meditating on story ideas. And the original idea was just a title of a book, and it was called How My Grandpa Whipped the Cossacks. And it just tickled me. So, I'm Jewish. Cossacks are like a big archetype for me. I think a lot about history generally, Jewish history in particular. In Cud, one of my Cuds, I once did a story called Fiddler on My Face that was kind of a riff on shtetl tropes, but also not just shtetl tropes as a straight satire, but shtetl tropes as they affect my consciousness, because I actually sort of put myself in the story as the Tevye character, and there's Cossacks in the story, and it was just kind of a goof. It ended up being a regular thing that was displayed at Jewish comics festivals for a while. I was always sending it out. So that was kind of a template for that kind of topic, but I hadn't really. And I thought about starting things along those lines, like I was going to do a web comic. I don't know. But that was all long in the past. But one day this idea just popped into my head. I had other ideas that I was working on, but then they didn't pan out. And I went back to it and I thought, wow, maybe this could be something. Edge City was about a Jewish family. So, we really kind of brought in, that demographic, both because it's authentic to us and because we understood that was a community that could support us. And it did. So there was like a really nice kind of feedback loop on that. And so I was kind of attracted, I knew that there'd be an audience if I did something with that kind of a theme. So that was attractive too. I thought, well, maybe this is worth investing some time with and thinking about and developing. So then I was sort of off to the races. Originally, I wrote the story with a framing story. So the original story was a kid in the 70s, who was basically my age, but talking to a person that would have immigrated from Eastern Europe. They would have still been alive back then. And then his grandfather. So then the grandfather tells him the story, and then it ends with the kid back in contemporary life. And I thought that would be good because kids would relate more to a kid now, and they wouldn't have to plunge into this history. But I was involved in a critique group for a little while, and I showed it to the critique group, and they said that the framing story was boring. He said, yeah, get rid of the framing story. Like, the interesting stuff is the grandpa story. So I said, okay. I realized they were right, and I cut the framing story out and then just worked on it as the story it basically is now. And then, of course, I had to change the name because the grandpa wasn't involved anymore. So reluctant as I was, it was probably a good change. And just called it Mendel the Mess Up because I realized his problem was messing up. But the interesting thing is that for me, I guess, in terms of how it came about, is that I kind of worked in from this title. Like it didn't, like I had to decide okay, I've got a title. Like, what's the story here? Like, how does this happen? Like, what kind of a world do I want this to be? It's always been my ambition as a cartoonist to create singular worlds, right? That aren't the world that we know it now. I mean, as much as I like comics and that are set in recognizably realistic worlds, the stuff that I really admire are the things that are just completely that are invented, not completely, because obviously it's based on history in a certain extent, but I really love it when cartoonists, can create worlds that are obviously their worlds, and I really aspired to do that, generally speaking, but certainly with this book. And so I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, I have more questions along the same lines, I think. I guess my next bit would be, so as you're putting together this pitch, how did it end up becoming a graphic novel specifically? Right? Like, did you have an agent, for example?
No. Well,
okay.
It was always going to be a graphic novel. So, and like I said, I tried to do other graphic novels before and hadn't been able to sell them. Contrary to what people think, just because you've been published for years and years doesn't mean anybody cares about what you're submitting. It doesn't really help. But I really wanted to do a graphic novel. I wanted to be, I thought of myself as the kind of person that could do it, and I wanted to there was an aspect of wanting to prove to myself that I could do this. Like, this is what I want to be. Like, can I be it? Can I manifest this thing?
Yeah.
So it was always going to be a graphic novel. I worked it up. I have friends that do kids graphic novels, middle grade graphic novels. I know a number of other people who are doing this successfully. So I asked them, what do I need to do to get an agent to submit? And they said, well, you need 10 finished pages, you need 60 penciled pages, then you need a synopsis, then you need, a pitch. Okay. So that's what I set out to do. That's what I was creating. So that's what I did. I mean, and I just, I was kind of I just did it in my quote unquote spare time. I made time each day to work on it. And I got these things together. I didn't have an agent. I mean, it's a long and winding story, but I can tell it to you. I didn't have an agent. And I went on the site where you can filter agents that I've used before. You can filter agents, like I want a graphic novel agent. You can put it in and you'll get a list of, and they're real agents. It's called Agent Query. It's a really great site. So I had 25 agents and I sent, my little proposals to all of them. And it was like, either they didn't reply or they didn't want it. So I was sad. And I was like, it's probably destined for the drawer, that sucks. But this was actually during the pandemic. So I started sending it out in like March of 2020. So during the pandemic, everybody's connecting with old friends. So I decided to connect with my old friend. And the old friend I decided to connect with, who I hadn't talked to in a while, was actually the guy who was friends with Dan Klaus in high school. A friend of mine, Jimmy Marks, who lives in Chicago. I was like, haven't talked to you for a while. What's going on? So we did FaceTime. Talking. What are you working on? What are you doing? And I told him about this book. And I actually sent it. I said, you want to read my book? And he's like, okay. So I sent him the book. He got back to me. He said, I liked your book. You should send it to my brother-in-law, this guy, Bruce Black. He's really into Jewish middle grade fiction. He's got like a blog or whatever. So I was like, okay. So I sent it to him and he really liked it. He said, I really like this. I really want to see it published. It's like, oh, wow. Somebody's actually encouraging me because the agents hadn't. So he said, you should send it to this another agent. He had another agent that he knew. So, okay, great. So I sent it to that agent. She gets back to me in like a half an hour. I don't want to do it. Yeah. But she said, I don't want to do it.
Oh, okay.
But she said,
at least she got back to you. At least she got back to you.
I'm like, oh God. But she says, send it to this small publisher of Jewish books. Maybe they'll be interested. So, okay. So, agent recommended me. I sent it to the publisher. Don't hear back for a month. After a month, I'm thinking, now I should give these guys a call. I'm sure they'll tell me no. I get a call or an email. I don't remember which one it was. I ended up on the phone with this organization called PJ Library. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're a philanthropical organization that distributes Jewish kids books for free.
Oh, okay.
They're huge. There's this huge. I didn't know about them. I never heard about them. And they said, "Hey, we're looking for Jewish middle grade graphic novels, and we'll give you a grant. If you finish for your book, if we like it, we have to approve a script." So I was like, "Oh, awesome!" So I wrote up, I wrote up a script which I hadn't actually done yet, for the entire thing, and I sent it to them. They approved it. I got the grant. And then I also got a letter from them saying, if you publish this book, because they're not a publisher, if you publish this book, we'll buy, X thousands of copies. So
nice.
With that, I ended up getting an agent who's Dennis Kitchen, actually.
Oh, cool.
Who I've known for years.
Yeah.
I didn't really know he was. I mean, I knew he was an agent, but I didn't really think of him as an agent.
Sure.
And I actually wrote to him to ask if he knew any publishers, because I thought with the letter I can actually just approach publishers. Maybe they'll go for it.
Yeah.
And he offered to represent me and got me the publishing deal with Holiday House within like a couple months. And
nice. That's fantastic. That's a really interesting kind of string of things that led you to there.
Yeah, it wasn't as simple as send it to an agent. The agent gets the deal. It was like, if I hadn't talked to my friend, I don't know,
Yeah. No, it's funny. We were talking earlier about how, like all the cartoonists these days are going to school, and like agents send scouts, I guess, to all the cartoonist schools, and pretty much everyone who graduates from a cartoonist school has a graphic novel contract like as they graduate, and I find that kind of fascinating, that. And then here you are, like you had to go through all of these steps to eventually get there. But that's fantastic. That's a neat way of getting there.
I guess I'm just glad I got there. I jumped from the cliff. There was like it's like the hot, it's like the Lord of the Rings, there's like the rope ladder over the gorge.
But as I said, I really liked this story. I liked that it was Jewish, and I liked that it was in a shtetl, which is, as you say, there's plenty of shtetl not memes or whatever, but there's a cultural idea of what it is. But that this is a historic, right? Like that it's not like you're trying to go, here's something that's historical, right? And I just thought it was it felt very real to me in that sense. But as you say, you were also building your own world. And I liked it on kind of all the levels. And I liked how Mendel changed through the story. I liked how his perspective on the world changed, not just his actions, but that he actually learned something. It's like the kind of kids book that I love giving to kids, because it's not preachy, it's aspirational, right? Like too many of the because I tell you, I read a lot of kids fiction, because we have to do the kids graphic novel every month, and so many books are so kind of inward looking rather than outward looking, and I liked the way that you did this. This was very strong, and it's funny too. It's funny. There's great cartooning in it. I really like this book. I really think you did a great job here.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I felt, I felt very good about it. I felt the little tumblers click into place, and I wanted to write the kind of book that I really liked when I was a kid.
Yeah,
I really like books like that. Books that were moved fast and took me somewhere where I didn't expect to go.
Yeah. Well, especially because you said that it had an origin as my grandfather. Did you now when it was his grandfather? Was it still a middle reader book in your head?
Yeah,
it was. Okay, so it's always been a middle reader book from
always.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really like the middle grade stuff.
Yeah.
At this point in my life, and it's funny because, early on, or not so early on, I mean, my impulses were very transgressive. Like, I wanted to be an underground cartoonist. I wanted to, scare the bourgeoisie or something. I don't know. I like punk rock, and I like, stuff like that. I mean, I still do. I mean, and I still like that stuff. But it's certainly after I had kids. I mean, that impulse really left me, and I really wanted to write stories that connect with and move people, and that they can get some kind of value, hopefully even like spiritual value out of. So yeah. And the middle grade stuff is just, it's exactly what I liked about the Donald Duck stuff. I mean, I don't want to write, complex, fancy stories with like great themes. I don't know, that maybe that's not the wrong way to put it, but I actually, maybe I feel completely unable to approach adult life. Maybe I just, to write things about grownups, I feel like I don't know anything about grownups in a certain kind of way, even though I've been one for a really long time, had kids and been married for years and years and all that stuff. But like writing stories about, he came home and she had an affair and da 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 da. I just, there's an escapist element I really like, but also it's not really escapist, right? Because in any good story, you're confronting things that move you and are important, right?
Yeah. Did you feel like a mess up as a kid yourself?
Oh, I feel like a mess up now. I mean, this is a story about my subconscious. It really is. I felt for a lot of my life like I was cursed in a certain kind of way. I felt like I would get to certain places and it just wouldn't work out, and like, I just felt like I felt like, it's not so much that a mess up like Mendel, like the things I do come out wrong, but like just being cursed. And also this is kind of emerging as a theme in my work, actually, not being completely comfortable about who you end up being, who you find yourself being.
Sure.
You asked me earlier at the beginning of the show, what makes you want to do comics? And, I made a joke about finance. The truth is the older I get, maybe, and, what the kind of life that I've ended up living, what its costs and benefits really are. I feel ambivalent about it. I feel ambivalent about being an artist my whole life. And I wonder if, and I wonder, and sometimes I envy people that have like, regular jobs and like pensions and all these things, that don't have to wake up every morning and, reinvent themselves or try to figure out like, how they're gonna, make their way through the world each day. So a lot of my stories are about finding a way to reconcile the fact that you are who you are, even though you may wish you were different in some ways,
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty positive that most people in finance or most lawyers or most whatevers all feel exactly the same way as well. I'm pretty confident of that. Some don't. Some like, oh, I chose right all the time, but I don't think that's the nature of humanity, right? Like I think the grass is always greener, you know.
Well, that's why it's a great theme. I mean, it is a universal, right? And especially I think for kids,
Absolutely.
we live in a society that, basically runs on people's insecurities. I mean, that's what capitalism is all about, right?
Yep.
That's what consumer society is all about. So everybody's insecure. Yeah. But, I'm insecure in like my way. And that's like a way that I can put into writing and that maybe people can emphasize with, and that can really drive a story. Right. And so, yeah, just this notion, and then this notion of wanting to be useful to people and wanting to feel like your actions means something in the world, and that
Yeah.
you're helping your family, that you're helping your community.
Yeah.
You know,
How early in the development of Mendel did you realize that there was an external event that could be solved?
what do you? I don't know.
Well, I mean that, and I don't want to give away the story for anyone who may not
Right.
have read it, but he has the evil eye put upon him, and he's able to solve that evil eye, right?
Yeah.
So at what point did you unlock that part of the story?
I think that was I think that was pretty early on. I think
Okay.
that was pretty early on. But I don't remember now. Like I say, I started with a title, so it was like, okay, there's going to be Cossacks, they're going to come to the village. So the way I had to write it was, you know, and the way I write comics is, and I've talked to a lot of people writing comics, and we were talking about this earlier, but I just like grab a piece of paper and start, you know, doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just draw a box and I just draw a box and I just go.
Yeah.
On a piece of typing paper.
So that to you is writing. Is doing your thumbnails, you are writing.
This is how I write my comics. This is how I do it. You know, so there's no point. I mean, there is with some people, not with me. There is no point where I'm like the words are separate. The image. I don't start with thumbnails and then fill in the words. I don't start with a script and then do like the visuals. I do it all of it starts at once. And even though, you know, a lot of the pages these are actually nice looking pages, but a lot of the pages are, you know, very like rapidly sketched.
Yeah.
You know, other people can't read them usually, but I can. And so I would just do a chunk every day. And every day it's like there's a little problem to solve. Like, what's next? What's next? What's next? I will start with a synopsis. You know, I'll try to think of the story because that's what I did with Donald Duck. You know, you had to give them like a synopsis, a very detailed synopsis of the story. So I will try to think of a synopsis and sort of outline the basic things that are going to happen in the story. But when you actually sit down and start to write page, you know, write the story page by page, a lot of times, like, you either deviate from the synopsis or you just didn't. The detail, you know, the devil's in the details. Like the synopsis, like, oh, he goes here and sees this. Well, how does that happen in a way that makes sense? And you have to sit down and figure that out. So each day when I'm writing the story, spend like maybe an hour and a half working on it. I take like baths. This is how I think of things. I take like really hot baths because then the ideas like float up to my brain. I go in with like a question. Okay, you know, what happens when he gets to the bridge? And I think. And then I come up with the next like maybe 5 pages. Move it forward 5 pages. And then the next day, it's the next 5 pages. So somewhere in there, I figured out the solution, you know, to that.
And this, I guess I'll call them a charity that said, write a script and we'll give you a grant, that kind of thing. When you wrote that script, it was the thumbnails.
Yeah. So all I had was the thumbnails, and I mean, I had a bunch of finished pages, but I didn't actually have a script. The thumbnails were the script. And what I realized was that it's really good to have a script because it allows you to really think it through, because the thumbnails, I'm just like sort of scribbling my dialogue down on the paper. And then, you know, I'm doing all my lettering in Photoshop now, which is great because it's really easy to change. And I change a lot. Like I do a lot of rewriting, you know, all through the process. But what I realized was when you have a script, you can think about it more, but B, then when you lay up the comic, you can copy and paste the dialogue or the words of the text, whatever, into the pages that way.
Sure. And
that's a much more systematic and good way to do it. So that was actually
so they were able to, and I don't mean this in a mechanical way. I mean they knew enough to be able to read your thumbnails.
They didn't read my thumbnails
as a script.
No. I sent them a script. They
were
you
like, did send them? Okay, I see. I see. Okay.
I had the first 60 pages done. They could read that as a comic.
Right.
You know, some were finished, others were penciled, but they all had, you know, they were like, I can show you my pencils, but they're tightly, pretty tightly penciled pages with the computer font in them.
Yeah.
And actual balloons.
Yeah.
So you could read those as comics quite easily.
Yeah.
When they got to the end of that, there was only thumbnails, and that's where the script started, actually.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
Yeah, I can't give them my thumbnails.
Did you when you were writing those Vertigo comics for other people, though, you were writing scripts. You weren't sending them thumbnails either.
No, but I would actually
thumbnail for yourself.
Yeah, I would do them for myself, and actually for Donald Duck later on, not originally, but in later years, you would have to do thumbnails for them as a writer just to give the artist some guidance.
Oh, interesting.
Without dialogue. Yeah. So I would just, do like.
So there are Terry LaBAn Duck comics out there. They just haven't been published.
Yeah, they still have them in the files at Egmont. Yeah, there are. The artist didn't see, for DC, they didn't see my thumbnails, but I did have them, sure, because that's how I write the comic.
When you're thumbnailing, are you, particularly the way that you describe that you work, are you literally going just panel by panel, or are you thinking about the page as a construction at that
Well, I'm thinking of the page as a paragraph.
Yeah.
Right? So every page in your comic, in a comic book, should make sense as an entity, as a unit, right? And every page should have a beginning and an ending, but and then ideally the ending should be a cliffhanger, right?
Which is your page turn, right?
You want people to just not be able to resist turning that page.
Yep.
So all the pages have to have those qualities. So I'm definitely thinking about it like that. But then you see, once I do my initial draft, the real writing happens when I do the second draft, and that involves a lot of times I'll actually like cut the thumbnails apart and start moving things around and pasting them and doing that. And so that, like, even if the pages don't fall into line on the initial draft, and they do a lot of times, I can fix that when I do the second draft.
Yeah. Do you spend more time thinking about the right-hand page because that's got a hard page turn versus the left-hand page just is a soft page turn, as it were?
So, I mean, it can be. It's not necessarily the case that the left page is soft because of the way we read comics.
Sure.
That even though we can see all the information technically in front of us on a page spread, we don't consume it that way. And it's like a strip. We can see the 4 panels, but the only way to understand it is to progress through each panel. And so we read it as a sequence, and we don't really comprehend it until we finish that sequence, even though we can see it. So it's not necessarily the case that even though you can see that page, it doesn't need those qualities. But certainly, if you're going to have like a big cliffhanger, or you're going to have a big reveal, I should say, you're going to want to have it on the left-hand page.
Right.
So you're setting it up on the right-hand page.
Right.
And, one thing about a graphic novel, and I never used to pay attention to this, and when I originally did my alternative comics, I wouldn't really even lay it out. Like, I didn't really know what the page spreads were going to be. And this is crazy to me now, but I just didn't do it. But with a graphic novel, it's really important to keep track of your page spreads, especially if you want to have double page spreads. And then if you change it, it's really a pain in the ass because you can't just add 1 page. You always have to add 2 pages to keep your sequence the same.
Yeah.
So
I know a couple of people who, when they do their thumbs, they actually lay them out as 2 pages at a time, so that they're always conscious of where their left and their right is, so they just don't lose track while they're doing it.
Right. And that's a good thing to do. And I have templates like that. But the fact is, most pages, you don't have to worry about that. Most pages, it doesn't make that much of a difference. It's only when you've got like big reveals, big story points. If you have chapter pages and you want like to have some sort of chapter image, and you always want to have it on the right-hand page, you have to consider that.
Yeah.
I don't get too hung up on that stuff.
Sure. Well, also, I mean, if you're writing for middle grade, it doesn't necessarily have to be that structurally not perfect is not the right word, but I don't know, something.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, you want your reveals to happen when you want them to happen. You don't, it's not like, I could have I mean, it's not going to kill the story if the big reveal's on the right-hand page, but it's better if it's not.
Yeah. I know some writers who all they think about is where that the hard page turn is happening. And so they build everything around that in 2-page units,
Yeah.
But everybody works differently. And actually that is one of the things that I think is really the beauty of comics, right? Is that there are 50 different ways you can approach it, and every single one of them is right.
Sure.
It's not it also because there's that level of audience participation in comics that happens too, right? The audience controls time. The cartoonist doesn't control. You can try to control time, but it's the audience who actually goes, here's what's happening. I always use the Schultzian example, which is the Lucy pulling the football, right? Like if you actually look at that strip, she never touches the foot. I mean, she touches the football, but you never see her pull it away, right?
No.
Right? Like, so who pulls the football away? Well, it's the audience. The audience pulls the football away.
Right.
And that to me is the sort of the fundamental magic of comics, is that there's a complicity of the audience in the storytelling that nobody's really conscious of, but is there all the time.
Right. That's closure.
Yeah.
That's what Scott McCloud calls closure.
Sure.
His favorite concept of mine.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's true.
Cool. How long did it take you? I mean, obviously this went through a lot of different phases and kind of not starts and stops is probably the wrong word, but how long did the whole project take you once you were doing it in earnest?
Doing it in earnest. That's like once the whole project took place over a period of 5 years, but there were a lot of time I wasn't actually working on it. Yeah. There was already a chunk of it done when I got the deal.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, if you probably add it all, once I got the deal, I'm going to say maybe a year.
Okay. Huh.
Maybe a year.
Yeah.
I don't think it was any longer than that. I had to pencil, I had 60 pages done. And so there was 140 pages that hadn't been started at all.
Right.
So I had to pencil those too. But it was about a year. I mean, when I work pretty fast.
Yeah.
I'm a pretty fast worker, and I did everything myself.
Yeah.
Everything.
Are you doing better than a page a day?
No.
At some stages? No.
And they're broken down. So like I pencil the whole thing before I ink, but I color each page as I finish it.
Interesting.
So I don't like ink everything, then color everything. I pencil everything, which also involves the word balloons and dialogue and things like that. But inking is color too. So when I ink the pages, it probably takes me on an average of 2.5 hours to ink and color a page. A lot of pages, most pages. Some pages are bears, so they take longer. Pencil, maybe like a couple hours.
Yeah.
Penciling is harder than you'd think.
Yeah. Do you spend more time doing your thumbs or doing the penciling?
Doing the penciling.
Okay. No, yeah. I mean, I know a couple of cartoonists who like all of their energy goes into that thumb.
Interesting.
Like to get it it's usually the ones who talk the most about gesture, right? Like they're trying to get a fluidity of like, oh, here's the perfect distillation of an image that I want to capture, but it's not the rendering of that. It's the expressiveness of that. Does that make sense as a thing to say?
I guess. I mean,
it made sense when
not
they
the
told
way
it.
I think at all.
Yeah, sure.
You
Well,
know,
yeah,
I'm like, I mean, gesture's super important. Don't get me wrong, and figure movement and the way figures move and things. That's all super important. It's not something I'm not gonna say anguish over, because sometimes, like, sometimes I spend a lot of time trying to get figures right. I mean, sometimes, like, I'm like, and when you draw on an iPad, you just like step back, step back, step back. It's not, before it was like on a piece of Bristol all day, but
right.
with iPad, it makes corrections a lot easier, and it also makes like lines a lot easier. Like if you don't draw the line right, you can just step back. Whereas before it was like, oh, I got to cut a piece of printer label out and paste it on there and redo it. So it's changed my drawing a lot in that sense, but I don't know. I think a lot about the Wally Wood chart and just try to get like variations. And that's something I think about a lot. And I struggle a little bit with I think my comic sensibility is a little old fashioned.
Yeah.
I'm not a big bleeder. I like boxes on a page. Yeah. I'm still like, to me, like a great comic to read is still like a Harvey comic, or Donald Duck, Osamu Tezuka has been like a huge influence on me in my later years. But I mean, he's influenced by Karl Barks. So, but that kind of sensibility, really clear panels. I mean, I want everything like really easy to read, but when I look at other middle grade books, I mean, especially like people that are coming out of the cartoon schools, it's like, every page is a bleed, and, there's like graphics on everything is, splash panels and bleeds and stuff. And I don't know, I find too much of that hard to read. Personally, but then I worry that my stuff looks kind of old fashioned.
No, it doesn't look old fashioned. No, not at all. Not at all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it's a worry of mine. I think
Yeah.
You
feel free to worry, but you don't have anything to worry about on that level. In terms of your cartooning, I would say your cartooning is pretty gosh darn immaculate.
Oh, thanks. Honestly. Not fishing for compliments, but that's something I think about. Just having enough so that it doesn't look stodgy, because also when there's too many boxes on a page and they're all colored, that can lead to a very static feeling. I mean, you want to have enough variation to let the pages breathe a little bit. So all that stuff, but the thing about it is it's just also arbitrary, right? It's just whatever you want. I mean, there's no rules for this stuff. You want every page to be a bleed, make every page a bleed, You want to have nothing but talking heads in your entire comic? I mean, hey, man, go for it. It's just, it's completely arbitrary in the end.
Yeah. Well, again, that's one of the things that I love about comics as opposed to other media, because other media feel to me like they have much more rules that actually have to be applied. And a lot of that, I think, is because they're controlling time, right? Like, for example, in a movie or a television show, it's coming at you at 32 frames per second, no matter what happens, right? You can sit at home and you can pause, right? But that's not the same thing as in a comic where you can read panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, and then you can go, wait, let me go back to panel 1 in my head, right? Like that happens all the time when I read comics, at least, is I'm constantly looking around the page,
Right.
So
I taught comics for some years, actually, like 8 years at various schools in Philadelphia. And, I learned a lot doing it, in terms of, rules and, placement and how people see and also how people make comics. I mean, we were talking earlier. I mean, one thing I realized teaching comics was that a method that to me seems utterly sensible, and there's like no other way you could possibly do it. Like, I would show, my students how I made comics. Okay, you do this, it's perfectly rational. Like none of them would do it. They would all just like launch off on their own direction. And it was like, oh, like it's actually not obvious. It's just the way I do comics, and other people don't do comics that way.
Well, but I think that's the strength of comics. So, okay, we've been talking for a while, so let's start to wrap this up.
Okay.
What's next? Do you have your next book planned out? Are you working on something?
I do, and I have a submission ready, but I can't talk about it. I'm totally
Sure, of course.
superstitious. I haven't shown it to my agent yet. I have shown it to my wife, my oldest son. So we'll see. Hopefully it'll fly.
Is it also middle grade?
Yes, but it's a very different thing. It's not a Jewish thing. Also historically based, but also historically based fantasy, but about a boy. But besides that, you know, I mean, you would see similarities just because I did it, but
sure,
it is a different project. So hopefully that'll fly, and you know, if it does, you know, you'll certainly hear about it.
How far into that project are you?
I'm ready to send the submission, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I got 60 pencil pages and 10 finished pages, and I'm doing it just like I didn't have an agent because it's a new thing.
Yeah.
My wife always tells me I do too much work on these things, but you know, the truth is, you don't know if something's worth pursuing until you put a lot of work into it. You don't know if it works.
Sure. Yeah. I don't know that that you're expected to have whatever you said, 60 pencil pages. I actually don't think that that's an expectation that is the standard expectation for pitching books these days.
Maybe not.
You know, I mean, if it helps you structure, if it solidifies it in your head, if it makes it real, then all those things are fantastic and great. But yeah, I don't think you need to do that.
Maybe not. You know, but as my agent said, you know, as Dennis said, you know, if it's a new thing, you're not necessarily going to go with the publisher that you went with before. Maybe we will. I mean, we'll have to see. The more you have, the better. Then it's kind of a weird thing. So I want people, you know, I want people to read it to really, you know, see what it is.
Sure.
You know, then they're going to need to get far enough into it to get a sense. And if you can't stop reading after those 60 pages, then
sure.
You know, whereas if it's just 10,
makes all the sense in the world.
I mean, 10 pages, that's like nothing for a graphic novel.
Yeah. All right. So graphic novels from here on out, is that the idea at least?
You know, I would love, you know, at my advanced age to just do, I mean, I love doing long stories. It's all I ever wanted to do besides a comic strip, but I did that. So, I mean, I would love to keep doing it. I mean, I would love to do, you know, a 3-book series and, you know, or whatever. And that would carry me into like, you know, I can't do it anymore. I really, really, really like it. It engages, you know, every impulse I have. I find it to be, you know, immensely satisfying work. So I would love to do that. I mean, you know, God willing, I mean, you know, we'll see.
is this next project the potential for being a multi-book
story? Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I thought of it that way. I'm not pitching it as a series, but it can certainly be a series. Mendel, one of the problems was just I would love to do a sequel. I haven't been able to figure out how to do that yet, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only problem that I would have with a sequel to Mendel is that it's Mendel the Mess Up, but he solves being a mess up.
Exactly.
And so then you've kind of got the Gilligan's Island problem, right? Like once they get off the island, then the story's done, you know?
Yeah. I mean, there may be opportunities to expand the world or something. I mean, I don't know, but right now it's really a one-off. It's very complete in and of itself.
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll see. I would love to be able to do that. And if it's not that, I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll be, I don't know what else it'll be. I don't know.
Well, I mean, as I say, the quality of work here, you know, I think it's really just a matter of time until you get that one that's like can be a 3-book series, and it'll happen. And I just think so. I really liked this book, and my manager who helps me pick the books, who usually is not interested in Jewish themes at all, even though this is only kind of semi-Jewish. But she really loved it as well, you know, and I took that as a very, as a very high recommendation from her, because, you know, it was almost like I liked it despite, and I thought that was really, really strong, you know. So
thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm glad. I mean, I conceived it. My hope for it was, you know, yes, it's set in a Jewish world, you know, it's a Jewish story, but I always intended for it to be accessible to people who knew nothing about, you know, Jewish
I think it
people,
very,
that
I think it
setting.
very much is, Terry. I think you should be very, very proud of this book. You know, regardless of what the next one is, like this was very, very strong, and it did everything that you want it to do.
Well, thank you. I hope you
Yeah.
sell a bushload of them.
Well, that's what we're trying. I mean, we've got at least 300 kids who are getting it through this. So, you know,
Cool.
yeah. And okay, and so then the last question is very much like the first. It's this. I asked the same question of everybody because this is a series of interviews. As I said, we're almost at 250 of them. We definitely have people who are watching this who want to make a career out of comics, do things like that. And so I always ask, people come to me and they go, I want to do this. I'm very fascinated by this. I just don't think I'm good enough. I'm not sure. You know, it's a little different, right, than maybe teaching comics, you know, because presumably those people know that they want to do it. But I hear from a lot of people like, I think I want to do this, but I don't have confidence. I don't think I can draw well enough. I don't think my ideas are good enough. I don't want to show my stuff to anybody, blah, 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 blah. So to people like that, what would be the piece of advice that you might give them? And it can be something practical and physical. It can be something sort of spiritual or emotional. What might you say to someone about they want to make comics?
Well, this is what I always say, actually. You know, if it bothers you more not to make comics than to make comics, then you will make comics. You know, I do this stuff because I just can't live not doing it. Like, it bothers me so much to not do it. Like, there's this compulsion. I mean, it's like it's really almost an obsessive compulsion. And it just, you know, and there's been long stretches when I didn't really cartoon, you know, after the strip ended for a while. I mean, there's been stretches of my life, but I always I used to think when I was younger, if I didn't do it, like somehow I would die, you know, and I don't feel that way anymore. Thank God. I mean, I've gotten over that, but it's such a strong compulsion. I just have, you know, and if you have that, then you will make comics despite everything you think about yourself. And if you don't have that, impulse, then lucky you, you know, relax. You know, the world does not need another cartoonist. The world does not need another comic book series. Like, it's fine. Nobody gives you an award, you know, at the end for like, you spent your life as a cartoonist. I mean, sometimes people get awards, you know, that's great. But, you know, it's up to you. Nobody else cares. You know, you can live a great, productive, beautiful, valuable, heroic life without drawing comics. You know, if it matters that much to you, then you're going to do it. And, you know, if it doesn't, then you won't, because it's a really hard thing to do and to keep up, you know? So in a way, it's like, don't worry about it. Just like, if you want to make comics, you're going to make comics. You'll sit down and make those comics. You'll make it work.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me, man. Well, look, I really appreciate you taking the time talking with us this morning, or this afternoon, I guess, for you. Give me a minute here. We're gonna switch the camera to me. We'll come back to you at the end of the show, but I got to do a couple thank yous and stuff here. Little housekeeping. Hey, hi, you sitting there at home. How you doing? Everything good? Is your new year starting off okay? It's already 2 weeks into the new year and things are already like, I don't like 2025 already, but you know, we got to do the best that we can. And, you know, so maybe you're sitting there at home and you're like, I want something to read and I don't know what it might be. I will recommend Mendel the Mess Up. I really will. It is funny. It is fun. It zips along like a good piece of cartooning should. It has some good lessons in it. It has some great cartooning. You're really going to like this. So get a copy. You can buy a copy from us. There's a button and there's a bell and there's a thing. You can buy a copy from us, but get a copy. Get it from your local library. Get it from your local comic shop, or get it from us. Either way, you will be very, 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 very happy with that choice. Next month's Kids Club, the book will be Mr. Muffin's Defender of the Stars. Mr. Muffin's Defender of the Stars. It's about a cute little dog who solves an intergalactic war. This is this was fun. You'll quite like that. Wait, this is next month's book. The Adult Club. I didn't bring a copy over here. Can you grab me that one, Ben? Sorry, thank you. Professional show business. I'm really good at this. It'll be I Heart Skull Crusher. This is next week's interview. I'm talking to Josie Campbell, who's the writer of this. It's kind of a sports comic in a post-apocalyptic future. Yeah, the adults of you are going to like this. Not really a kid's book. And then the month after that, I'm talking to Hugh Dronday, who's did The Murder Next Door. So that's a memoir. So that's the next couple of shows and interviews that are coming up. So hit the bell, sign up, do the thing. You know what's going on. I got some thank yous to make. I want to thank Jordan, my producer, who does a bunch of stuff that none of you ever see, but I couldn't do a show without him. I want to thank Ben, who's been running the show here and helping me out on the actual thing. I want to thank the staff in my store, Zoe and Kat and Katie, who are the greatest staff that a comic book shop could possibly have. And they give me the freedom and the ability to sit here and interview cartoonists, which is, it's a lot of fun to interview cartoonists. And I couldn't do it without them. So I really appreciate them, as well as Max and Chrissy, who help out. I want to thank all the members of the club. We wouldn't have anything without you. I want to thank, who am I forgetting? That's everybody, right? Other than the cartoonists, because they're the most important ones. If it wasn't for the cartoonists like Terry right here, I would be sitting in a store full of blank paper, and that would really, really suck. I really, really like the fact that I've got all of these dreams and thoughts and things around me. So Terry, thank you so much for doing what you do, and for 30 plus years of making comics and doing it day in and day out. It really does matter. Maybe you don't know that it matters, but it matters to guys like me. And so thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much, Brian. Thanks. I really, really appreciate it. This is
my absolute pleasure.
This has been great. So
excellent. Okay, well, and buddy, if you ever get out to San Francisco, let me know. We'll do something. We'll do a signing. We'll do something.
That'd be great. My aunt lives there, so it's
sweet. Great. Well, then hopefully sometime soon we can make something happen. Okay, cool. All right. We'll see you next time.
Yes. Happy Sunday.
Bye-bye.
2025.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Graphic Novel of the Month Club. If you enjoyed what you were watching, please subscribe and hit that bell up in the top corner. If you enjoyed the books that we're talking about and the creators that we're talking to, every month we pick a brand new book. The staff votes on it. It's a program that helps keep our store alive, and we'd love to have you as a member. You'll get a new book every month. Just follow that URL at the bottom of the screen.